So, Matthew.
Steven.
Let's do this. Welcome to Redirect, Immigration Law and Perspectives, a semi-weekly,
almost weekly,
dive into the world of immigration law and its human consequences. I'm your host, Stephen Robbins, joined by co-host and fellow immigration attorney, Matthew Archambault.
That's me. I'm here.
Matthew A.
That's right.
Now, Matthew, how are you doing?
You know, I guess I'm getting increasingly frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, overall, personal life, I'm doing okay. It's just that immigration stuff, I think, is getting frustrating again.
Yeah.
I had one good week. So I think that's okay. I think that's,
Welcome back to reality. Listen, I'm finding myself in this place. I think it's a form of burnout with the dialogue and the whole debate. And just, I'm seeing a Republican congressman saying something quote tweeted by somebody saying, it's not a crisis because actually the numbers are the same as they were in 2019. And there's graphs and charts, and I just don't give a anymore. I can't take it. It's too, on the one hand, I feel bad for even expressing that because we've talked about this before. You and I live during our work hours and sometimes after work hours with the sort of secondary trauma of the system. But in reality, for us, we don't face the real sort of soul crushingness of the system because we were born here. There may be family issues, obviously. So I hate to complain. And I do think a lot when I'm starting to feel this way about how much worse it must feel to be like a dreamer or somebody who was cut off from DACA by 6 months and they're totally undocumented. And they hear me complain about how I'm tired of listening.
Tired of the news.
But I don't know. Are you feeling any of that? Just total exhaustion?
I can't watch the news anymore because there seems to be two things, right? Republicans just being awful.
Mm-hmm.
And then Democrats or mainstream media, as we say, just glossing over everything and justifying everything because it's not Trump and just getting so wrong. And both sides get it wrong. And Republicans get it wrong because I think generally they're racist and bigots and they want to own the libs.
Mm-hmm.
The other side gets it wrong because they want to protect Biden. And so many times I've just turned off the TV while the news was on. My wife is like, what are you doing? I can't watch it.
That's kind of a dick move, I'll say.
Yeah, she's like, can't you just change the channel? And I'm like, no, I've made my decision.
Taking your wife's side on this one. You don't just turn off the TV when you're watching with other people. But anyhow, it's also thinking is hard. Life is hard. And there's this spot where it's the administration can be an improvement and still be bad.
Right. Now, we've talked before about how something can be better, right?
Right.
We have the concept of better and worse. So is Biden better than Trump? Okay. I think generally...
Trump also set the bar underneath the floor, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So
20 feet below ground.
It's are there podcasts better than this? Yes.
Yes, there are.
Does that mean they're good podcasts? No, that does not.
Does not mean that.
So, we should be, one would think today, we would be a very happy podcast because 2 major immigration bills were passed through the House and they're on the way to the Senate. And there's the Promise and Dream Act, which focuses on dreamers and people who came here when they were under 18 years of age, and also TPS recipients. Then there's the Farm Workers Modernization Act, which focuses on farm workers. Actually, it focuses on the agricultural industry.
Right.
So,
and we should be clear because we're going to get a little bit critical. These things don't happen if Republicans are in charge. Maybe actually the Farm Worker Modernization Act.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk, I think, more about the Farm Workers Modernization Act.
And these are, well, in certain ways, they're definitely steps in the right direction, one more than the other, in my opinion. But also, they fall short of actually fixing the system. But one thing that's hard about this whole situation is well, we're going to get into the Farm Workers, is it Modernization? Give me a break. Modernization Act is farm workers or immigrants, undocumented immigrants, have been placed in such a position over so many years, really since the last amnesty in 86, with the militarization of the border and draconian laws in 1996. They're really trapped here and they don't have many rights. And so when something like this comes along, it can be mostly garbage and can be very bad. But, I get down to one of the last paragraphs and it's like people who get this temporary status will be allowed to travel to Mexico and return. And that's like one of the number one things that people ask me about. They've been here 20 years. Their father is dying. They just want to go see their father and they can't. And this would open up that possibility. And it's such a small thing, but it's not. It's huge for many, many people. And so when people are in such desperate, dire straits, it makes for a poor negotiation posture, I guess.
Right. So the Farm Workforce Modernization Act.
Well, I wanted to preface it with something.
Okay.
Can we do a preface?
Why don't I give my very brief summary and then
Okay.
I think your preface will work well into it.
Okay, sure. That's not really how a preface works, but that's okay.
Well, it's whatever. So in general, it offers a pathway to citizenship for farm workers.
Oh, that sounds good.
Yeah. So now why don't you give your...
Oh, well, I really wanted to... First of all, good framing. Are you a grower, by the way?
Well, we're going to talk about why that...
Matthew's got a big
That is
apple.
the most generous
Right.
reading of the bill.
It is funny how you sent me this FAQ sheet from United Fresh Produce Association. And the FAQs and the highs and lows are so much different from one you would read from like ALA or some sort of immigrant rights organization, right? The focus is totally different. But I wanted to take a step back and say a couple of things just generally about labor. So I've made this point before. I think agricultural work is much more complicated than people give it credit for. I even think most general work is more complicated than people give it credit for. I worked at Subway in high school. After my first day with Jared, a weird guy. That guy just lost weight eating sandwiches and got famous. And then he turned out to be like a...
Yeah, then he got famous for something else. But okay, go ahead.
What a tale. Would you watch that movie?
No.
Would you watch a movie or a documentary? Neither one.
Maybe a documentary, but
yeah,
it's not a movie.
Shout out to Subway Jared. So on my first day, I was so overwhelmed. I came home and I threw up, and it wasn't because of the food. I really was it was overwhelming. There was so much to know. And I remember one of the managers who wasn't an owner, he was an employee like the rest of us, but he knew everything about that store, like the weird, quirky things that the cash register would do, or who to call if the oven broke, or, all these different things. It's the jobs that we take for granted as being easy or anyone could do, oftentimes come with a whole world of complexities beyond what we would normally think about. And at a recent hearing, I think I tweeted about this, but I asked a client who works in agriculture to actually describe her work. And she went through season by season the different types of things that they have to do, going through row by row, thinning the trees or pruning the trees. And it's complex work. It's difficult work. It's not the kind of work that you could just plug any old person into and they would excel at it. So one of my first issues with the bill in general is just the idea that it's prioritizing farm workers over, what if you worked a couple of years in agriculture and then you opened a restaurant like 5 years ago? Well, you don't qualify for this. Or what if you do like the apple harvest, but just that one season, and the rest of the year you're doing handiwork or construction? Or what if you're a caretaker or somebody who does something totally different? You don't get to benefit. So I object to, in many ways, the premise of the entire thing, that we're going to sort of pit immigrants against each other and say that some are better than others, and certain industries are more important than others. So,
and I will say that ALA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, supported this bill. And I'll tell you right now that if I was in Congress, God forbid, all of us, I would not have voted for this bill. I think this bill is honestly one of the most racist and disgusting bills I have seen in a long time. And it's insulting. It's funny because ALA goes on and on. You'll see them talking about the Promise and Dream Act, and they'll go into it, but they'll just say, we support the Farm Worker Modernization Act, and they don't describe what it is.
Right. Well, maybe we should get into it a little bit then.
Well, what will it do? What's kind of I know the part that you like the most, and I'll let you read that part.
Well, so this is actually, it's on the ALA website, but it looks like it was put out by the House.
Yes, it was.
This quote is actually kind of shocking. It's it's shocking and it's not at the same time. It's like perfectly American, right? But it says, this is right at the top. The Farm Workforce Modernization Act of 2021 will stabilize the agricultural sector and preserve our rural heritage by ensuring that farmers can meet their labor needs well into the future. Now,
and it was not written by former Congressman Steve King.
Yeah. Who wrote this? What does that mean? Our rural heritage. How does this preserve our rural heritage? Before we talk about the legalization of the people who are already here, one of the main things that this does, I think actually the main point of this bill is to make it easier for farmers to bring over people using the H-2A visa so that they can live on the farm in farm provided housing, work the season, and then get sent back to their country.
While holding out a carrot of a green card that they'll probably never achieve.
For the H-2As?
For any of the farm workers. It's going to be hard.
I don't think H-2As I don't think they're on any kind of pathway to
You might be right, yeah.
No, I mean, I have huge problems with the H-2A program. The whole idea of the H-2A is that we need people to work here, but we don't want them to stay. What is that about? What do you think that's about? It's obvious, right? We can't have all these brown people just sticking around. So we'll have them live on camps. And, there's some labor protections, but they're not always very well enforced. It's almost impossible for these people to organize because they're brought together in weird groupings and they're not together very long. And so really abusive practices can go unreported and do go unreported. They're obviously in a position where their boss often keeps their passport, so they don't have flexibility in terms of changing jobs, or it's easy to intimidate them from raising complaints or bringing things to the attention of the government. So the idea that we're taking an H-2A program, which sucks already, and injecting major steroids into it by making it easier to get the visa, providing more visas, is a major problem, in my opinion.
I just want to take a step back and talk about the rural heritage part. Because what is our rural heritage when it comes to treatment of people who work in the fields?
Right. It's not good.
I mean,
have you heard of this thing, slavery?
Yeah. So that's something that we did. And most of the slaves were involved in agriculture. They were involved in the fields doing farm work. Then we still, till this day, we have farm workers who are enslaved. And not just they have bad working conditions and they get paid. You'll find reports in newspapers in North Carolina or Florida about groups of farm workers who are actually enslaved. And when you talk about the H-2A program or just undocumented immigrants working on these farms, it might not be slavery because they're getting paid, but it's pretty close to horrendous. And that is our rural heritage as we're talking about agricultural work.
Right.
So
I tried to figure out if it's not pointing to slavery and the fact that we criminalized being Black in the South after the Civil War and then put prisoners into the fields. It was a makeshift replacement of slavery. And we've had these abusive practices throughout our entire history. if it's not referring to those things, like what is that? What is the most favorable reading of that that phrase? I can't think of one.
Well, so one thing they also say at the beginning, the American agricultural sector is struggling under the weight of a growing labor crisis, which has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. So the question is, okay, let's say that's true. Okay. How do you address that labor crisis? Right. One way to address it would be to make these jobs more attractive. Okay.
Well, that sounds like capitalism, though.
Yeah. Uh, or the other way, which I guess Zoe Lofgren, who sponsored this bill, decided was to make it more like indentured servitude than it already is. And we talked a little about the H-2A, but there is a program that will, if you do agricultural work, that could lead to a green card, which sounds great. So, Stephen,
Right.
you're going to write a bill for agricultural workers that will lead them to a green card.
Mhm.
How would you structure your bill?
Me, like I get to just
Stephen
choose.
Roth, yes, you're in charge. You present your bill.
Okay, well, is this like my idealistic bill or something?
It's Stephen Robbins' bill
Stephen, okay.
that you think is fair.
That I think is fair. Look, I tweeted this the other day. I got a little bit of pushback, but honestly, like if you work through the pandemic in agriculture, let's say, if it has to be an agricultural bill, then you get a green card. If you want to make it a 1-year provisional green card and then you apply for the actual green card, I'd be willing to do something like that. I'm flexible, right? I'm not totally unreasonable.
I mean, well, let's see how close Zoe Lofgren from California, who is often championed as an immigrants' rights individual.
Well, first of all, we have to be clear about something because there's two things, right? First, there's the certified agricultural worker or CA. There's that, right?
Yep.
Not everyone who gets CA can get a green card, but a lot of people can get CA. So in order to get CA, CA is basically deferred action, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you've worked 180 days in agriculture over the last 2 years, then you can get CA and it can be renewed indefinitely with continued farm work, parenthetical, at least 100 days per year. So congratulations, you get a work permit. You get to travel back and forth from the United States to Mexico or to your country, presumably. And you can renew it indefinitely as long as you're able to work 100 days per year in agriculture.
Now,
what is this?
This might be attractive for some, especially people maybe closer to the border.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Maybe some people like that. Okay.
Lots of my clients would, like I said, primarily they'd be stoked about
the travel.
That's the main thing. But a couple things, and maybe this is accounted for in the bill. I don't know. But does this mean that when you hit 60 or 65 and your body's breaking down and you can only really do the most lucrative harvest of the year, and you're talking about 2 or 3 months, and that's all your body can give, that you're going to lose your CA? That's what it sounds like, right? And then what? Yeah. You're going to get your ass deported because you can't put in the time? That seems like bullshit, first of all. And what about, you don't have to be old. What if you're 29 and you get kicked in the head by a cow or something, and now you're disabled or you're facing a long-term injury and there's a gap in your employment? What do we do with those people? So I don't have all those answers, and I don't know if the bill addresses that, but it certainly doesn't seem to.
So other than call, the pathway to the green card would be long-term workers who want to stay can earn a path to a green card by paying $1,000 fine. It's just so insulting, honestly.
Right. Wait, the farmer gets fined, right? The farmer?
The farmer?
Does the farmer get fined?
No.
I mean, the farmer has employed illegally dozens of people, maybe hundreds of people over multiple decades. I'm sure that fine goes to the farmer, right?
No, that would be for the person in the fields.
Oh,
the immigrant.
Okay. Seems super fair.
Okay. And then, so what they have to do is, if they have 10 years of agricultural work prior to the date of this bill, they must complete 4 additional years of such work. So you've done 10 or more, right? You only have to do 4 more years of agricultural work to earn your green card and $1,000 fine.
Well, plus I'm assuming the green card application, which is $1,200 on top of that.
Yes.
And if you've done less than 10 years of agricultural work, let's say you've done 9, then there's good news for you, because with just an additional 8 years of agricultural work, you can get your green card too. And also the fine, don't worry about that.
And so do you think the farmers will know this?
Oh, yeah, of course they will.
You don't think they would use that in any way to their advantage, do you?
I'm sure that they would never do such a thing.
The agricultural industry was all on board with this. They were behind this bill.
They wrote it, I'm sure, 100%.
And so what's interesting, we were Googling around and we found United Fresh, which is a farm agricultural, whatever, advocacy group. And they put out their fact and myth sheet on the bill.
This is presumably to win over the growers or farmers who might be on the fence.
And so just reading it, it kind of points you to, what the real purpose of the bill is.
Yeah. So at the very top, and normally this is like writing 101, you want to lead with your strongest point, right? Myth. This bill will codify wage surveys into law and result in multiple wage classes. Under this bill, wages will be much higher than the current adverse effect wage rate. So the myth is that this is going to raise wages. And don't you worry, because the fact sheet proves that, in fact, this bill provides for greater certainty and granularity in wages. First, the bill applies a 1-year freeze of wages across all categories at the current year's rate. After the 1-year freeze, all wage rates are then limited and increases year over year to 3.25%, with the ability to decrease by 1.5%. So they're coming right out and letting the farmers know, don't you worry. We will be suppressing wages. So don't you worry about that. There's also this part, I don't know if you saw this, but myth, illegal farm workers and their spouses and all their dependents are provided a special expedited path to legal permanent residency and will move out of agriculture into other jobs in the economy.
God forbid.
That's huge, because that shows that this is an anxiety that the growers have. If we
give them an inch, they'll take a mile.
If you recognize the basic humanity of these people and you allow them to be here, first of all, they should definitely be here because we need them. But if we let them be here, then they're going to immediately leave because our jobs are shitty and our pay is shitty. But don't you worry, the fact sheet is here with the facts. This bill does not create an immediate path to permanent residence. First, it creates a temporary legal status that can only be renewed with significant agricultural work. Second, the bill provides the option of earning permanent residency through continued agricultural work, but it would take a minimum 5 to 10 years to earn such status, depending on the amount of past agricultural work the worker could demonstrate. These significant past and future work commitments would ensure the stability of American agriculture for years to come. Spouses and dependents receive the same protection that currently exists in the H-2A program. So
don't worry.
Yeah.
Don't worry. You're going to have your workers. You're going to have your cheap labor force. And you're going to be able to do whatever you want with them. Even more so because they're really going to be tied and committed to you.
I've come close in the past to using like a slavery analogy. And you got to be careful about that because slavery is slavery, right? So this is not that. But this is like pretty close to like a really archaic indentured servitude codified, right? It exists right now in a form and it's expressed in that FAQ where the anxiety is if we legalize these people, they'll have the freedom to go do another job. That's what the farmers are worried about. And so the bill sort of formalizes that anxiety and says, oh, don't you worry, we're going to force them to stay in your industry. It's crazy.
It's a terrible, terrible bill. And so let's talk about it can be beneficial because it, as you say, it will have people so they can travel back to their home countries. They get legal, so to speak. So maybe they don't have the anxiety over deportation, things like that. So I just think the overall negative outweighs the positive. And I can't believe this is the best that they could have done for the workers. But then again, that's assuming that they gave two shits about the workers. And it's clear that they don't.
I just have a couple other things I wanted to say about this. I'm really fired up because I work primarily with agricultural workers. And
it's going to get you rich. Yeah, actually, right? So from a business standpoint, this would be awesome for you, for your business. So if, everything they say about lawyers, we're only in it for the money.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's complicated. It's going to take renewal after renewal after renewal.
Oh, man. People don't even understand. I would have to hire probably like 2 associates because over the last 10 years, I've met with, I don't want to be one of those exaggerators and say thousands. It might be thousands of people.
Could be millions.
Who would qualify for this?
You represent every farm worker in the state of Washington. Just tell people.
I've met with many, many people who would qualify for this. And the reason why I think the correct position would be, if this passed, to be happy for the people who, again, most of them, a work permit gives them some flexibility in terms of their employment, but they're already working, right? They already know how to work here without a permit. The big thing would be the travel. And I would be so thrilled to see those people go get to see their parents, go get to see their family home. And so I would be thrilled for them on that level. But so we would have to be happy for them and then continue to push for this reform to be reformed, because this is absurd that the whole thing is absurd. But I wanted to say 2 quick things about farmers. One, I mentioned this earlier. The fact that we continue to treat the immigrants as criminals, fining them and restricting their freedoms. Somebody could live in cost status their whole life and never be able to vote or have like real substantive rights in this country. And they're required to pay a fine to get a green card is absurd, especially when you consider that this bill doesn't even begin to imagine penalties for the employers or for the farmers. Like, of course, right? They're the ones that wrote the bill. But the other thing about this whole industry that drives me crazy is Trump got us into a trade war because he didn't know what trade was, literally. And so China goes, well, we'll buy our soybeans somewhere else, idiot. So suddenly the farmers aren't having their goods purchased. And I don't remember the exact number, but it's in the tens of billions of dollars were just given to farmers automatically. Like, they didn't need to pass a bill because it's some old law that says that they can literally just print money for farmers. And the industry was kept afloat with so much money. And none of that money trickled down in any meaningful way to like the farm workers. And it just shows that like there is this real barrier between the people doing the work and the people who own these farms. If you own a farm, you have access to unlimited funds. You can be bailed out because of whatever. The president makes a mistake, gets us into a trade war, no problem. But if you're a farm worker, you're going to be treated like a criminal for the rest of your life. And people who say that white supremacy is over or that racism isn't real anymore and all of that was fixed when MLK gave a speech or whatever, just open your eyes. Open your eyes. We're talking about a law that just got voted on and passed in the House of Representatives. These aren't like law professor lectures about obscure ideas. These are structural issues. So,
yeah, it's a terrible bill. I want to talk just a little bit, because we're running out of time, about the DREAM Act, the Dream and Promise Act, I guess, that they just passed in the House. Mm-hmm. So I want to talk about one specific part of this. But if you came in, you're 18 years or younger, and you came in before January 1st, 2021, you can get a period of conditional permanent residence for 10 years. And then there are other provisions that make it if you already have DACA and TPS.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the part I really want to talk about.
That seems pretty good, though, right?
Yeah, but let's talk about the criminal bars. Okay. So the regular criminal bars that are already in place exist. An aggravated felony, crimes involving moral turpitude, any drug-related offense, any felony offense. So a felony offense may not be an aggravated felony. It might not be a crime involving moral turpitude that would not have gotten you in trouble before. Okay. And when you think of felonies can be very, very minor, and it really depends on the state that you live in, how they classify things. 3 or more misdemeanors or a domestic violence thing. There are some exceptions. Minor traffic offenses aren't involved. Certain marijuana-related crimes, nonviolent civil disobedience, domestic violence related to being the victim of, and any crime related to lack of immigration status. But the real kicker is there's a secondary review process. So in addition to the criminal bars listed above, there's a secondary review process that would allow DHS to deny applications from individuals deemed to be threats to public safety and those who have participated within a gang in the last 5 years. So anyone who has had any client touched by being accused of being in a gang will understand that their basis for saying someone was in a gang is so low and sometimes so erroneous that it's really not worthy of respect. Brian Johnson, who's been on the show a long time ago, practices in Long Island, and many clients who were accused of being in a gang by DHS because they wore a red hoodie to school,
Oh, well, that
signified something, right?
That's about right.
Or a blue hoodie or a black hoodie. So it's very vague for them. But also, DHS would be allowed to conduct a secondary review of an application if the person has been convicted of any misdemeanor that is punishable by more than 30 days in jail, with the exceptions that we had talked about above. So you have one misdemeanor that is punishable by more than 30 days in jail. You probably didn't do more than 30 days in jail. Let's say shoplifting, for example. Or let's just say it was a simple assault. You got in a fight with not a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a domestic partner, but you got in a plain old fashioned fight. That could be used against you. Then here's probably the most disgusting thing, okay? A person is also subject to secondary review if the person has been subject of a juvenile delinquency judgment and had to spend time in a detention facility if DHS determines that person is a threat to public safety. So a juvie thing, if you were put into juvenile detention, you might be 35 years old now, but DHS can use that against you. And we know from dealing with clients who are mostly people of color that many of their actions are criminalized a lot more than, say, the average white person. And I don't think that's a controversial thing to say.
Right. And also, people get in trouble and learn and stop getting in trouble too. Right.
Right. I mean, I think criminal bars really need to be looked at. And honestly, I think they should be eliminated. But when you look at this bill, the secondary review process, saying that they can use a juvenile delinquent, something that you had when you were a juvenile, against you, deny you status, and have you deported, right, is really, really shocking. There were a bunch of Congress people that stood up and spoke out against this, but that stayed in. And I guess the response is you have to draw lines, right? You have to concede points in order to get stuff passed. But this provision right here, if it was not in the bill, it would not have affected it getting passed in the House, and will have no effect on the viability of it in the Senate.
Right.
Do you think Ted Cruz is going to look at that and go, oh, there's secondary review?
Well, I'm going to vote for it because...
secondary review.
Secondary review.
Josh Hawley's going to be like, you know what, that secondary review, that's fucking genius, man.
Normally I'm against illegals, but they really took care of it with that secondary review thing.
And that's what kills me, that I like to say Democrats negotiate against themselves. But that is kind of giving them credit that they don't like this provision. Because clearly they do, and they like criminalizing immigrants. And it's just, we can do better. We probably will never do better, but we could.
The one thing I guess that seems good about that bill that you just sort of outlined is the cutoff date. That's amazing, because normally they would require like 20 years of continuous physical presence or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to help a lot of people, right?
Right.
And I guess when you look at the overall good, I mean, look, I hope it gets passed in the Senate. I wish they would do something about that. But let's say they don't, and it gets passed, it gets signed into law. It's going to help a lot of people. It's not going to help enough people. And then there are going to be people, but there are going to be people who are specifically targeted. And maybe we can say, oh, under this administration, maybe they're going to be softer with that secondary review or whatnot. Maybe you have some type of confidence in that. But if it's passed into law, it's going to be law, right? So when Don Jr. takes over, and he installs Eric Trump as head of DHS, that secondary review thing might be real.
Right. And one thing that worries me about something like, well, we can look at stuff and secondary review, which in some ways exists already in almost every immigration process through discretion and that sort of thing. But it could have a real chilling effect on people applying at all, even if people have fairly innocuous criminal history. I guess those things will get sorted out, and it'll take time to find out like where that line is and who do they consider a good guy and a bad guy. But, it's the same sort of thing as the farm worker fine, where it's like, you came here 20 years ago, you've been working your ass off, we're still going to fine you. In other words, like, you can never escape the criminal tag that we've given you. And it's that same sort of thing. Like, there's no such thing as being rehabilitated. Like, we're always going to be able to reach back and look at these things. I've got friends in high school who did some really bad things and screwed around and got in trouble. What's that?
Name them.
Anyways, other things like that. And I'm glad that we live in a society that doesn't always treat people as like perpetual criminals, but it does with immigrants, and that's racist.
Yeah. And I mean, we've talked about it in the past. You can have, a conviction from 1987 and it can jam you up. It's just crazy to me. But yeah, so, I mean, those two bills passed in the House. I think the Farm Worker Modernization Act is a bad bill. I would not support it at all. The other one, the Dream and Promise Act, I think it's better, but it has the flaw that is kind of endemic in our immigration system, and that's the criminalization of immigrants. And it's not like this thing went unnoticed. There are many congresspersons who stood up and offered amendments to take this out and actually had some support, but it didn't come out. Are we moving in the right direction? I would say maybe with the Promise and Dream Act, we are. I think with the Farm Worker Modernization Act, we're moving backwards, to be honest.
Right.
But we'll see what happens in the Senate. I don't think the Dream Act, because I think they need 60 votes, right, to get past the filibuster.
Well, unless they get rid of the filibuster, which I think is the big question right now. But
yeah, I can see the Farm Worker Modernization Act passing.
I hope that my sound is recording. You can see it, but just barely.
Well, we're going to find out, aren't we? I mean, if the show comes out as all they can hear is me,
it's going to be awesome.
Probably get an Emmy.
I don't think that's how podcasts work, but Matthew, it's good talking to you. We'll talk to you again next week. Take care of yourself.
Steven.